You're listening to an archived Cabral Concept podcast. After listening to this show, check out the most up-to-date podcasts available at stephencabral.com/podcasts or search directly on iTunes. And now, welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
Thank you for joining me here today on this Wellness and Weight Loss Wednesday, where I'm happy to have the privilege of bringing you this amazing topic today on a new diet that's getting a lot of press lately. And it's funny because I read about this diet quite a number of years ago when I was doing all my research for really what is the foundation of all diets, meaning that there are so many different diets out there. What should be the basis point? Because we all need to start with something. We need a structure. We need a framework for how we're going to eat. And then through that, we can begin to explore more of the details. Well, also, before I was reading the work of Dr. Weston Price, I was reading about the blue zones. I was reading about all these amazing diets. And when I looked at them, when I truly looked at them, I said, okay, well, what are we really looking at? Well, we're looking at something that resembles a whole food, mostly plant-based diet. And I found that extremely interesting because that's what stood the test of time, and it always has. So when I look at diets that are coming out now that are basically completely devoid of many of the high nutrient, high antioxidant foods, I get a little worried. I get a little worried because these things are being promoted as good for you. And I can say, well, they can do certain things to your body that might be beneficial, such as weight loss or lowering blood sugar levels. And all those things can be great in the short term. But I get worried when we look at short-term fixes and begin to make that a lifetime of diet plan. That does not work out. Remember, what works in the short term isn't always great in the long term. For example, in the exercise world, really hard workouts, pushing yourself extremely, extremely hard is going to get you in great shape. But at what cost? At what price? The price is massive amounts of oxidative damage. Which is why, yes, we can get away with it when we're in our teens and 20s, but it gets more and more difficult as we age and more detrimental because the free radical damage increases. So we get more of that catabolic state, more wrinkles, more spots on the skin, more aging, more fatigue, more all of that because our body over time gets depleted of minerals and vitamins and fatty acids and all of the collagen, all the things that we need to build back up the body. The body goes through something called entropy. It begins to break down. Well, remember, that can be reversed or at least slowed if we do things that do not always deplete the body. So remember, when we're on diets, and again, I can use the keto as a great example of that. The keto diet can be something that's fine in the short term, but not as a lifetime diet. At no point is it been studied for long-term use, nor should it be used for long-term use. If you're asking someone to really eliminate the majority of their food from carbohydrates, especially berries and great vegetables, and limit that to really 50 grams or so per day, you are missing out on the tremendous amount of anti-cancer benefits from those foods. Now, a lot of people say, well, the keto diet is shown to prevent cancer. That's not necessarily true. The keto diet can help when someone has cancer and we want to shrink tumors. And one of the reasons why that could work, again, these are all theories right now. They will be tested. And I'm not saying there's not a time and place. But remember, I would say it's more of a catabolic-based diet. You will lose weight on it. You will begin to better regulate blood pressure. But remember, since it is more catabolic, it slows thyroid in some people. I've spoken about this before. I've done seminars. I've done videos on this. And I test this in clinical practice, so it's verifiable. A lot of women, after about the 4 to 6 week mark of a keto-based diet, begin to actually gain weight, and they begin to lower their thyroid. They begin to lower their metabolism. So again, we have to be careful on what is good for the short term is not always good for the long term. And that's why, again, I get very worried because I see these people, these very well-known functional medicine doctors that I think are fantastic people as well. They get caught up in the craze. And they get caught up in the short-term research. Remember, you can't cherry-pick your research. You have to look at all of it. And that's what I do. That's why I know that there's benefit to keto. I know that there's benefit to some hard workouts, depending on who the person is if I'm looking to get them ready for an event, a sporting event, whatever it is. But I also know that the body can't go too yang for too hard, right? It needs some of that yin from Chinese medicine, or it can't become too catabolic for too long, or that does slow the metabolism as a protective mechanism. I've spoken about this before through the thyroid, the hypothalamus pituitary thyroid axis, and the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal based axis. And again, you can go back to previous podcasts, you'll hear all those explanations. So let me get back on topic here. And when I did see this diet, I said, and again, many years ago, this diet was called the Baltic diet. Today, it's called the Nordic diet. Now, why are we calling it that? First things first, a lot of times it's named for where it originates from. So the Nordic diet is originating from a lot of the Nordic-based territories, right? And those are Denmark and Finland and Iceland and Norway and Sweden. So what we're looking at are what are the foods that the people, indigenous people will say indigenous, ate there for thousands of years that have led them to have less blood pressure issues, not as overweight, less cardiovascular issues, less metabolic syndrome, which is the blood pressure, the cholesterol, and diabetes, less of certain types of cancer, okay? But I went through really how you can cheat death. And I believe it was just yesterday. I'm recording this 2 days later. And time flies. So when you're looking at that, and I said, how can you cheat death? Well, really what we need to look at are the top 3 causes of death. And I put that in there. I actually gave you a fourth one, a bonus one in there. That cause essentially 50%. 50% of all mortality comes from 3 things. And we can control that with a really healthy diet. This has been proven. I never want to give you information that you would then follow and you didn't get results from. Because I know that you're short on time. I'm short on time. We're all short on time. I don't even know what podcast it is today, right? We're always short on time, but here's the deal. We need to focus then our efforts with the time that we do have on what's going to get you the most results. And that's why I'm bringing a show like this to you today. And yes, it was yesterday's show. It was episode 872. I have a giant spreadsheet of all of my last 873, because today's episode 873. I'll put all the links today for today's show notes at stephencabral.com/873 right there. So here's the thing. And again, I was just saying, I have a whole spreadsheet of all the past shows. And then I just put like all the potential shows in my mind, like, oh, that's a great question someone asked. Let me put that in there so that goes on that master sheet. So hopefully I never lose that master sheet. So what I'm looking at with the Nordic diet is this. And when I see a diet, I said, does it pass? Does it pass the research? So even though I spent the majority of my internships overseas, I'm really a science at heart, meaning like I love Ayurvedic medicine and Chinese medicine and everything. I've spoken about Hawaiian medicine before, Native American medicine. And the reason I love those is because I know they work and they've been proven to work over thousands of years, whether we had the science or not. But we do have the science now, meaning we actually have the literature saying these herbs work for these reasons. And if you tuned in last Friday, we're going to be able to do amazing things with state-of-the-art medicine using plant-based medicine. What's going to change is the delivery method. And I've always spoken about that. I've always said that before. Plants are always our medicine, but we're going to be able to deliver it to the body in better ways. That is how truly we will combine the best of the East and the best of the West. When I say East, I just mean more of like the herbal-based medicine, okay? That is it. That is the future of medicine, and it's now. Meaning like we can do that. We do things right now, right? The Dr. Cabral Detox is based on functional medicine using Ayurvedic herbs and the best of functional medicine, using reduced glutathione, using N-acetylcysteine, using broccofane. A lot of people don't even know that's in there, but broccofane, you're getting that every day. And the amazing thing is that's coming from the broccoli sprouts if you're using that shake in the Dr. Cabral Detox. So anyway, really powerful things to come. But the Nordic diet, the reason I'm bringing you this is that I read the Baltic diet research many, many years ago. And I said, yes, this works. And it works for a reason. And I want to go through that today. Because not only do I want to teach you what the Nordic diet is, so that you can start to include more of it in your own diet, but I always want you to know why it works and how it works. And then you're going to be able to, that's why I believe it's so important. If you're able to, half hour a day, add an extra half hour, can you go back and listen to an extra podcast a day? Because the Cabral concept is meant to be an education. It's meant to be a functional medicine education for public and for doctors and health coaches. So the health coaches and doctors will pass it on to their patients and clients. And for public use, it will be using it with your family and your community and everyone that you can share that with. Because this is it. Like, this is the best. I believe it's the best of East and West. And what am I doing today? I am not saying that, oh, I came up with any of this. No, not that at all. There's no ego-based perspective. So when I say it's the best of, I believe I'm taking the best of the East and the best of the Western medicine and bringing it together. And I'm essentially the voice for these two communities, because I see people online. I give a speech and they're like, oh, love this information. Too bad he's a naturopath. And I see that and I'm like, wow. And again, like, my feelings are not hurt. I'm okay. If it was like 10 years ago, maybe I would have, but not so much anymore, because I can see that person's perspective. I can see where they're coming from, and I can just understand that their level of experience and knowledge and all those things in life is just limited. And that's just the way it is. And that's okay. Or at least that's my perspective, and I'm okay with it. And then I look at that and I'm saying, wow, that's, really strange. So if the same thing was said by an MD, well, then that MD would, that person would listen to that. So what I'm trying to do is, some people might not like my voice, my way of bringing this to people. So what I can do is, if I can spread this message and other people can then spread the message, there'll be more and more people who hear their voice, right? Because we all resonate with different people and different things and different ideals and different goals in life. And truly, that's what I believe it is. So please do pass this information on. So let's get right into the Nordic Diet now. And there's some main principles. The main principles are this, and you'll go really far in life understanding these principles. Okay, some of the main principles, and I'll give you three main ones, three big ones, then I'll break it down to the foods. I'll give you the shopping list. I'll even post it online today at stephencabral.com/873. So I'll put that right in there. All right, pretty amazing. And the first principle is this: plants over animals. All right. Now, all of a sudden, when I say that, anyone who's more vegetarian or vegan-based gets happy. And everyone who's more paleo-based says, that's not true. That's crazy talk. That has nothing to, like, animals don't have anything to do with higher cholesterol. Well, that's not true, because for some people it does. And the literature over time has always proved out that the more vegetables and the more berries, at least, like low glycemic fruit you eat, the better your health will be. That is indisputable. Like, you literally can't dispute that. You cannot dispute it by a lifetime. Now, you could say, oh, well, some berries give me bloating and some veggies give me bloating. I don't disagree with that. That's 2/3 of our practice. That means you have some type of bacterial overgrowth in your gut, or you have some type of yeast overgrowth. There's some type of imbalance. We can fix that, and then you can go back to eating the foods that you should be eating, right? So we look at all those specific things. Now at the same time, anyone who's more vegan or vegetarian is going to get mad at me. And the paleo people will then be more happy. Here's the deal. You can eat some meat, and you can eat some fish, and you can have some eggs on the Nordic diet, the Blue Zones diet, and the Mediterranean diet, and these other types of diets. What we're talking about, though, is always quantity. So I did a podcast, and I do hope you tune to this one, because it was very unbiased. I mean, really, I have no biases. I do not, and I'll tell you why. I'm using this research. I used it many, many years ago to get well myself. And then I said, okay, now I need to help my parents get well. They both have autoimmune-based issues. Okay, now I need to teach this in my private practice. So, like, that's always how it's been. Like, I needed to help myself. I didn't care who was right, because I simply wanted to get well. And there's so many people listening to this right now, again, it might be on a subconscious level, that are not even ready to get well yet, because they need to get well in a certain way, right? They need to get well through herbalism, but they can't use vitamins, right? Because vitamins are not natural, right? That's what they say to themselves. Or some people, I need to get well through conventional medicine because naturopathy is all woo-woo and all that type of stuff. Or they say, I need to get well through homeopathy anyways, because really that's what I need. That's what I'm all about. Or I only want to get muscle tested. I don't want to do all the other hormone testing or gut testing. So remember, by you saying I can only get well through one methodology, you are limiting yourself to the best of the world. And I thought that was going to be the case myself. It's why I spent 2,500 hours interning all over the world. I said, whatever form of medicine is the best form of medicine, that's what I'm going to use. And that's how I'm going to help people get well. And I will eventually spread that to everyone in the world. Well, to my surprise, every form of medicine I studied helped people get well. Didn't help them all get well, but it helped a lot of people get well. What happened? Well, some people responded really well to that form of medicine, and some people didn't. Some people responded really well to this form of medicine and acupuncture and herbs, and some people didn't. So what do they need? Well, they needed someone who was not going to force them into one box, right? One methodology of getting well. And so when I realized that, I said, oh, All forms of medicine can help people get well. You just have to know when to use it and with whom. So then I set about, and then that was a very complicated, so that actually left me very frustrated. And that's when I started writing the book, The Rain Barrel Effect, many, many years ago. And it was a very complicated book for me to put together until I started to put it into practice. And I just did thousands and thousands of labs, met with thousands and thousands of people. And then I said, okay, now it's simple. Because in the beginning, everything's complicated. And in the end, everything's simple. So when someone comes and I'm speaking with them over Skype or an office or whatever it is, I get the story, I get the picture. And then I say, okay, I've got it. This is where you started. This is where you were. And now here's where you are today. I got it. Okay, let's confirm that through lab testing. And then let's get to work getting you well. Okay, I mean, that's essentially how it works. All right, I don't even know how I get on these tangents. So let's pull us back on track. Number 2 is this, is that instead of eating a lot of meat protein with more saturated fat, the Nordic diet favors more fish and shellfish. And they alternate them. They have them throughout the week. Okay, and I'll talk about that because it's about 3 times per week. And then the third part of the Nordic diet, which is a little different, this is interesting, they're eating more foraged countryside foods. So what does that mean? Well, they're eating more of the wild-based things they see growing in nature. And some of those things are more of the spices, which I'll talk about in a moment, that they make into some sauces. And they're getting more root vegetables, like hardy vegetables and cruciferous vegetables. That's a little different about this diet. And I want to explain that. So there's a lot of benefit to that we've seen. So essentially, when we look at the foods that you can eat in the Nordic diet, you can have berries, you can have fatty fish and shellfish, you can have whole grains, but slower to digest grains, more of the ancient grains, including rye as well. And you can have your fruits and vegetables, which I just spoke about, okay? And then you can have some protein, which I'll talk about, some meat-based protein, which is very, very rare. It might be once a week, every couple weeks, okay? But it's mainly fish. And you can have some eggs, but again, rare with your other proteins. I'll talk about the fats in a minute, and that's because of this right now. So what did I just mention? Let's do a little recap. Plants over animals for the most part, okay? Seafood or foods in a lot of omega-3s, which is why I'm telling you right now, one of my favorite tests, so overlooked, is the omega-3 test. It's so simple to look at how inflamed your body is. If you run the test and you're not a 3-to-1 ratio from omega-6s to omega-3s, you're inflamed. You're eating too many high omega-6 foods, bottom line, or too little omega-3 foods. It's so important. It's one of the easiest things you can do to maintain and improve your health. Yes, you can take the omega-3 support supplement, but it's so good to test. Even if you're taking omega-3 supplement, test to see if you're getting the right dosage for your body, because that will massively deflame. I like using that word. I don't think it's a word, but I like using it. Deflame the body. And again, you can test that. So this diet is very anti-inflammatory from the fruits, the veggies, and the anti-inflammatory fat from the fish, the good omega-3s from the fish. So when you're looking at that, okay, seafood, veggies, the mainly plants, you're saying, well, this is basically the Mediterranean diet. That's what I thought, right? That's exactly what I read. I said, this is the Mediterranean diet. What's the difference? What is the difference? So then I started to say there has to be, because if not, we're really just talking about the Mediterranean diet. So I dug deeper. Into this, and the Baltic diet, of course, it was called the Baltic diet then. It only changed the Nordic diet to make it more palatable. So they gave people more choices by adding more spices and things like that. That's what turned it into what the modern day Nordic diet they call it now. Well, so here's the thing. It is essentially the Mediterranean diet. It honestly is. This is the Mediterranean diet with a couple changes, and I want to go over the changes, and then I want to give you the whole food list, okay? So we know we can have the berries, the low glycemic berries. We know we can have the fruit. We know we can have the seafood, okay? We know we can have some nuts, things like that. So here's the deal. Here's the big differences. Root vegetables. The Mediterranean diet is not really surrounded by a lot of root-based vegetables. Well, in the Nordic-based diet, we are looking at potatoes and sweet potatoes, and we're looking at all the ground-based vegetables, and that could be celery, anything like that. But we're also, carrots is in there, parsnips, beetroot, like that's more of the Nordic diet. Why? Well, it's a little cooler, right? So we're looking at climates where they're going to eat more root vegetables. And that's why root vegetables are so great for the Vata or ectomorphic body type. They provide a great energy source. They can be warming from the earth or very hardy, especially when cooked, of course. It makes it easier to digest. And a great fuel source, a lower glycemic, higher fiber food source. But they're also, again, this is not as Mediterranean diet. They're eating a lot of the cruciferous-based vegetables. Cabbage, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, fennel, right? Those are more of the hardier vegetables as well. So when I look at the Nordic diet, I'm saying, okay, this is interesting. because the climate more of New England where I live, this would be a very good diet as well, especially for the fall and winter and early spring, because this is a very hearty diet. And when I look at my diet during the winter, I'm like, yeah, I eat a ton of parsnips and rainbow carrots, the turnips, the beetroots, maybe some cooked kale, definitely Brussels sprouts and broccoli and fennel. I love fennel. That's a newer addition over the last couple of years to my diet, the spinach, the cauliflower. So these are all amazing things. Like cabbage, I like cabbage, but I can kind of take it or leave it. It has that bitter taste, but of course it is very good for you. So here's the thing, with all these bitter vegetables, all these cruciferous vegetables, why is this so great for you? Why do you miss out on these things if you're doing a lot of the keto-based diet? Here's why. Is because they're very high in sulfur. They're sulfur-based vegetables. Why is this so important to our health? Sulfur-based vegetables turn on these phase 2 detoxification of the liver. Okay, really, go back and listen to my episode on the right way to do it or how to do a functional medicine detox. Because if you don't have these sulfur-based vegetables, or you're not doing something like the Dr. Cabral detox, which is giving you the supplements to make it happen, is you are not enabling your body to remove the plastics you come in contact with, the heavy metals, the pesticides, the VOCs, like all of the things in your environment. You can't even see half these things. You honestly can't because they're on a microscopic level. Well, your body's able to eliminate those for the most part, so it doesn't cause things like cancer and high levels of inflammation, autoimmune-based disease, if your body has all the nutrients it needs. So that's why I'm so big on cruciferous vegetables. Again, the cauliflower, the Brussels sprouts, the broccoli, the cabbage, those types of things, so great for your body. And the Nordic diet also now adds in some spices, okay? They add in the onions, they add in the garlic and the leeks. And so those are additions too, which you won't see as much of in the Mediterranean diet. Yes, of course, they're using onion and garlic in the Mediterranean diet, but they just go beyond that, meaning like they're using a lot of dill and mustards and horseradishes and those types of things, again, in the Nordic diet, okay, versus the Mediterranean diet. There's a couple things too. Again, like this is not something that I'm a big advocate of. I want to give you the truth of what's in it. They do allow like 1 serving a day, maybe up to 2. And we're talking about like a small serving, which would be a couple tablespoons, right? Of a fermented dairy product. So maybe some like quirk. We used to call it quirk when I was over in India. A curd. It's like a yogurt, but it's warm. So again, we're not eating the cold foods. You wouldn't want to eat cold, cooling foods in the cooler months. And it usually always coming from a raw-based sheep or goat. So we're not getting the very sick cattle that we have over here in the West. So really, really important to look at that. Again, what are we talking about? The Mediterranean diet with some additions to it. That's why this is so important. I did a podcast called The Foundation of All Diets. If you haven't checked that out, that's one of the most important shows I believe that you should listen to. I will see if I can link that up. I'm going to put that in my notes, but of course, I may forget. Go to stephencabral.com/podcasts, and you can literally type in foundation in the search bar, and the Foundation for All Diets should pop out, okay? So check that out. That was one on what every diet has to have. Like, it's the foundational based point. So then in the future, because remember, what is it? Every 3 years or so, we get a new diet fad, right? So we've had Atkins and we've had South Beach, and these aren't even bad diets. They're not. What they were missing, though, was the long-term transition off of it and also the short-term health, meaning like just because you can lose weight on an Atkins or South Beach, and again, like it's the first 21-day phase of ours. So I'm not going to say that it's not, but we help people choose healthier fats. And the other thing we do too is we help them transition off of it. And so I have a podcast. Again, all this information is free. I'm just trying to share what we've seen over 250,000 client appointments in our practice. And it's called How to Transition Off a Low Carb Diet. Because you can't be on it forever. Because if you're on it forever, it's most likely going to slow down your metabolism, especially if you are female and you have a history of thyroid-based issues, okay? So again, I'm just saying that from a clinical perspective. Now, before I give you the entire meal plan here, I want to tell you this. The one thing that I don't agree with, so I can't even really get behind the dairy part of it, because for most people, that's not going to be the best thing, but I'm not necessarily against it if you get the body clean. Here's what I'm against, though. I'm against the use of canola oil in the Nordic diet, okay? And here's why. The majority of canola oil, 93% of it, is all GMO. I can't get behind that. The best oil to use if you're going to use an oil, and don't cook with it, use it as a dressing, is olive oil. Now, that's Mediterranean, right? So what I'm saying is take the best of all the diets. Again, mostly plants, less animals, more monounsaturated and non-cooked polyunsaturated. Less, again, like I just said, of the saturated. You can still have some. I'm not saying you can't. and you're going to eat better overall healthier fats. And again, you can take that omega-3 test, you can see what your levels are. And again, if you're worried about your thyroid, if you're worried about all those levels, you can run the adrenal hormone test, which is an amazing test for metabolism and your overall hormone levels. Okay. And then if you're worried about, well, I can't eat Brussels sprouts or I can't eat broccoli, well, then run an organic acids test and see if there's yeast overgrowth, or run a stool test along with it to see if there's bacterial overgrowth. So you can figure all these things out. I mean, that's the truth. Okay. So my one caveat is that I'm recommending the olive oil over the canola oil. So more of the Mediterranean fat rather than the canola oil. But in both diets, they do also recommend and are fine with having avocado as well. And that's a very healthy fat. That can be a great fat for you as well. Okay, so let's go through the foods that they're eating and kind of the percentages. So the majority of the diet, the bulk of the diet, at least 50, 60% or more, is all coming from their vegetables, their fruit, and some of the heartier grains, whether it be oats or rye or a slower digesting grain like that. We're not talking about processed flour. We're talking about, those whole grains, okay? So again, you might not believe in that. That's okay. Stick to mainly the vegetables and stick to the lower glycemic fruit, and then move on to their next main group, okay? And that's healthy fats as well. That's the avocado and the olives, and in their case, the canola oil, which again, I can't get behind. All right, their next level to that is especially canola oil cooked. I don't want to make this a whole podcast on canola oil, but it's such a dangerous, it's a dangerous oil cooked. I know it's less than saturated fat, and that's why a lot of people promote it, but that doesn't mean it's better for you, okay? It does not mean it's better for you. By nature, it's a volatile polyunsaturated fat that really becomes rancid when you cook with it. So I'm going to leave it at that. All right. So the next level is freshwater and saltwater fish. So it's the seafood, and it's things like mollusks, and it's shrimp, and it's salmon. It's all of the good oily fish as well to get your omega-3s. And then after that, a couple times a week, 2-3 times a week, you can get a little bit of egg, or you can get some of the dairy, or you can get some meat. And they're going with, again, this is interesting too. They're going with more of the venison meat and elk. Now, that's also very different than eating a cow. And the reason is these are more wild animals. That wilder animals are going to have more omega-3s, right? So they're going to have a better omega-6 to omega-3 profile, somewhere usually around the natural 4 or 3 to 1 ratio. So really, really important. Sorry, that would be more the lighter meats. And then once a week or every couple weeks would be more of the red meat. And that might be in some of the sweets as well. So hopefully that was helpful. Let me go through a list of the foods, but essentially they're having potatoes and nuts, mainly almonds. They're doing legumes, beans, and yellow and green peas. They're doing lamb and reindeer and elk and some chicken and turkey. For dairy, they're doing more of the fermented foods or fermented cheeses. Again, if you're going to have one, I would go with more of the raw goat cheese or raw cheese, or maybe some of the fermented foods if you can deal with that. We already talked about all the different type of fish you can have. Eggs once a week or every couple weeks. The cereals and seeds, that would be more of the grains, whether it's muesli or it's oats or it's barley or it's rye or it's psyllium. So all of the very hearty grains. The fats are going to be more of the sunflower, the canola oil. But again, you already know that, in my opinion, go with the olive oil, go with the avocado, and then get it, of course, from the nuts, like in the Mediterranean diet. And the herbs and spices, we talked about those, whether it's onions and garlic and leek and parsley, and horseradish can be great as well. All of these really fantastic things. So if you are someone that's looking to decrease your inflammation, you're looking to improve your overall blood sugar, decrease heart disease, decrease blood pressure, decrease chances for cancer, help with those joints, improve your skin, all of the great thing, improve Alzheimer's, or even prevent it, like all of those amazing things. Look into today's food list, but also think about it. Go back and listen to the podcast, The Foundation for All Diets. Understand this, that we need as humans, if your diet right now, again, in the short term, I understand you can play with all sorts of different things, you can have fun, but in the long term, if your diet is not predominantly produce, that means vegetables with fruit, okay? And again, if you're someone that gains more weight, well, you'll stick to the lower glycemic berries. And if you're someone that doesn't gain as much weight, well, you can eat pretty much whatever fruit you would like, as long as it's a clean version of it, right? So if your body, though, is not currently getting predominantly fruits and vegetables, and I'm looking at whole food meals, it's going to be vegetables with your protein and your healthy fat for better food combining, then you're off base. And that's just the bottom line. And I'm not coming down on you. It took me years to discover this, but that is what the real research proves out, That's going to help keep you healthy. That's what's going to keep your family healthy. So hopefully today's podcast was helpful. And if it was, please do feel free to share with anyone you feel it could serve. Did you know that the body really only becomes sick or imbalanced in only 2 ways? Over time, you become deficient in vital nutrients, and you also accumulate toxins internally and from the environment. As those nutrients diminish and you increase your total toxic load, your body then begins to show the first signs of dis-ease. It's actually quite predictable, and the good news is that if we know how you began to fill up that proverbial rain barrel, we also know how to empty it to begin the healing process. I was fortunate enough to learn this ancient healing process from my mentor after suffering from debilitating diseases for close to a decade. It was only when I began to implement these techniques did I finally overcome my illnesses and go on to live a life of energy and vitality that I now enjoy. I'd like to share with you now what I discovered after traveling all over the world and how to combine the best of ancient healing wisdom with state-of-the-art science. Allow me to teach you exactly how I've been able to help over 250,000 people to empty their rain barrel and begin to transform their body and lives into what they've always hoped they could be. To get your copy of the international bestseller, The Rain Barrel Effect, simply go to stephencabral.com/rainbarrel.